Chosen One. One of the strangest seasons you will ever experience in life begins so quietly that you almost miss the moment it starts. There is no dramatic collapse, no single event that clearly marks the beginning of the change. Life simply begins to slow in ways you cannot quite explain. Conversations that once filled your days start becoming shorter. Invitations arrive less often. Messages that used to appear on your phone every hour gradually turn into silence. At first, you assume it is temporary, just a busy week for everyone around you. But the quiet does not lift. Days turn into weeks, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The world continues moving at its normal speed while your own life seems to step into an unexpected pause. For many people, this is the moment where doubt begins creeping in. You start wondering whether you did something wrong. Maybe you drifted away from people without noticing. Maybe opportunities stopped appearing because you somehow missed your moment. The mind searches for explanations, and the easiest explanation is always the harshest one: that you were somehow left behind. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with isolation. From childhood, we are trained to measure our worth through connection, activity, and constant movement. If your calendar is full, life feels successful. If your phone is quiet, something must be wrong. That belief runs so deep that when isolation arrives, most people interpret it as failure before they ever consider that it might carry purpose. But for the chosen one, this quiet season is rarely random. In fact, it often marks the beginning of a transformation that cannot happen while life remains crowded with noise and expectation. What you are experiencing is not the end of your path. It is the moment God begins preparing you for a different one. The difficulty is that preparation rarely feels exciting while it is happening. It feels slow. It feels uncertain. It feels like standing still while everything around you continues forward. Yet throughout history, this exact pattern appears again and again in the lives of people who later step into extraordinary purpose. Before Joseph stood in the courts of Egypt, interpreting dreams and managing a kingdom's survival, he spent years in isolation, forgotten inside a prison cell where no one expected greatness to emerge. Those quiet years did not look like progress to the outside world, yet they were shaping the very character that would eventually carry authority. In the same way, the quiet season in your own life is not empty. It is simply invisible work. During this stage, something deeper than your social environment begins shifting inside you. Without the constant movement of daily distraction, your thoughts grow louder. You begin noticing things about your life that were once buried under routine. Old decisions come back into focus. Certain relationships start looking different when viewed from a distance. Habits that once seemed harmless suddenly feel misaligned with the person you are becoming. This awareness can feel uncomfortable at first, because clarity often arrives with honesty. You start recognizing how much of your life was built around expectations rather than purpose. You see how easily a person can move through years repeating patterns simply because everyone else around them is doing the same thing. Isolation interrupts that cycle. It forces you into a position where reflection becomes unavoidable. And while reflection can feel lonely, it is also where rebuilding begins. God often uses silence the way an architect uses an empty lot. Before a stronger structure can be built, the ground must be cleared of what was there before. Noise fades so truth can become audible. Distractions fall away so direction can finally come into view. That is why the quiet season can feel both unsettling and strangely meaningful at the same time. Part of you misses the energy of your old environment, yet another part of you senses that something important is unfolding beneath the surface. Your instincts begin whispering that the pause is not permanent, it is preparation. And while the world might see your slowed pace as stagnation, heaven often sees it as alignment. God is not in a hurry the way humans are. Where people chase immediate results, God focuses on foundation. Character, clarity, resilience, and wisdom rarely grow in crowded seasons where every moment is filled with distraction. They grow in stillness. They grow in solitude. They grow in the quiet places where a person finally has space to understand who they are and who they are meant to become. That realization begins changing how you see your current circumstances. Instead of interpreting isolation as abandonment, you start recognizing it as separation for a purpose. Certain voices had to grow distant so your own inner direction could become louder. Certain routines had to disappear so new priorities could emerge. The quiet is not proof that your life has lost momentum. It is proof that something deeper has begun. The chosen one often walks through seasons where it feels like the world stepped away, only to later discover that those very seasons were the training ground for everything that followed. What feels like emptiness today may eventually become the foundation of your greatest rise. And although it may not look impressive from the outside, heaven understands exactly what is happening. Because sometimes the most powerful transformation in a person's life begins the moment everything around them finally becomes quiet. Chosen one. The longer the quiet season continues, the more you begin noticing something unexpected about it. What first felt like emptiness slowly reveals itself as space. Not the uncomfortable silence you feared in the beginning, but a kind of open mental territory you rarely had access to before. When life was busy, your attention constantly moved outward. Messages, obligations, conversations, expectations, noise from every direction competing for your focus. In that environment, it is almost impossible to hear your own thoughts clearly, let alone recognize God's direction moving quietly beneath the surface of your life. But isolation has a strange way of interrupting that constant flow. It removes the distractions that once shaped your daily rhythm. At first, this removal can feel harsh because humans become attached to stimulation without realizing it. Activity becomes a form of comfort. Even small interactions, casual conversations, and routine social contact can create the illusion that everything in life is functioning normally. Yet much of that movement exists only on the surface. It keeps you busy enough that you never stop long enough to ask deeper questions about who you are, what you truly want, and where your life is actually heading. Isolation removes that protective layer of noise. When the world around you grows quiet, the mind naturally turns inward. Suddenly you have time to examine thoughts that once rushed past unnoticed. You start reflecting on decisions that shaped the last 5 or 10 years of your life. Certain memories resurface with surprising clarity. You begin recognizing patterns in your behavior and relationships that were invisible while you were surrounded by constant activity. Some of those realizations feel encouraging. Others feel uncomfortable because they reveal habits or directions that no longer align with who you are becoming. This stage is what many people misunderstand about isolation. They assume the purpose of the quiet season is simply rest or recovery. But in reality, it often functions more like a clearing process. Imagine a field that has been growing wild for years. From a distance, it might appear healthy because it is full of movement and color. But underneath that surface growth, the ground may be overcrowded with weeds and tangled roots competing for space. Before anything stronger can be planted, the field must first be cleared. The removal looks destructive at first glance. Plants are pulled out, the soil is turned over, and the ground appears empty for a while. Yet, that clearing is exactly what allows healthier growth to begin. The same principle often applies to your life during seasons of isolation. God begins removing the distractions that once filled your environment so that deeper alignment can take place. Social expectations that once influenced your decisions lose their power when the crowd disappears. Without constant feedback from other people, you are forced to examine your motivations honestly. Why were you pursuing certain goals? Were they truly connected to your purpose? Or were they simply paths that seemed acceptable to everyone around you? These questions do not usually surface in crowded seasons, because the pace of life keeps you moving forward without reflection. Isolation slows that momentum long enough for truth to rise to the surface. As this process continues, something else begins happening inside you. Your priorities start shifting. Activities that once felt important lose their urgency. Conversations that used to consume your attention now feel shallow or repetitive. You start recognizing how much of your time was once spent responding to expectations, rather than building something meaningful for your future. That realization can feel unsettling, because it challenges the structure of your old routines. Yet, it is also the beginning of clarity. God often separates individuals from distraction before revealing direction. Scripture shows this pattern repeatedly throughout history. Moses spent years in the wilderness, far from the palace of Egypt, before encountering the moment that defined his calling. During those years, he was not surrounded by political influence or royal expectations. Instead, he lived in a quiet landscape where the noise of his previous identity gradually faded. Only after that period of separation did the moment arrive, when God spoke clearly about the purpose Moses would carry forward. The wilderness was not a detour in Moses' story. It was preparation. In the same way, your current season of isolation may be clearing away influences that would have made your next step impossible to recognize. Certain relationships may have distracted you from your deeper direction. Certain environments may have encouraged habits that kept you comfortable but limited your growth. When those influences disappear, it can initially feel like loss, but over time, you begin noticing something remarkable. The mental clutter that once filled your thoughts slowly begins settling. Without constant noise, your mind becomes more focused. Ideas begin forming with surprising clarity. You start understanding your own values with greater precision. Even your sense of identity begins shifting as the expectations of others lose their control over your decisions. This is where the clearing process reveals its true purpose. Isolation does not simply remove distractions from your environment, it also exposes distractions inside your own thinking. Old fears, assumptions, and limiting beliefs become visible once the external noise fades. You begin questioning whether those beliefs truly belong to you, or whether they were inherited from environments that no longer reflect your future. That kind of examination can feel intense because it requires honesty. But honesty is exactly what creates transformation. God does not clear the ground in your life to leave it empty. He clears it so something stronger can be built in its place. What feels like loss in the present moment may actually be the removal of obstacles that would have blocked your growth later. The chosen one often experiences this stage as a quiet dismantling of everything that once defined their direction. And although the process can feel slow, each layer of distraction that disappears creates more room for purpose to emerge. What once seemed like isolation begins revealing itself as alignment. And slowly, without dramatic announcements or sudden events, you begin realizing that the quiet season is not taking something away from you. It is preparing you to see what was impossible to recognize when your life was filled with noise. Chosen one. From the outside, the quiet season can look almost uneventful. Days pass without dramatic change. Your routine may appear simple, even repetitive. To someone watching from a distance, it might seem as if your life has paused, while everyone else continues moving forward. But what most people cannot see is that isolation rarely means inactivity. In fact, this stage often becomes the most important period of internal transformation a person will ever experience. When distractions fade and external expectations lose their influence, the mind finally gains the space necessary to examine itself honestly. Thoughts that once moved quickly beneath the surface now slow down enough to be understood. You begin noticing emotional patterns that shaped your past decisions. Certain reactions that once felt automatic now become visible. And with visibility comes the opportunity for change. This type of awareness rarely develops in crowded environments, because constant activity keeps the mind focused outward.
But during isolation, the attention shifts inward, and that inward attention begins revealing parts of your identity that were previously hidden beneath routine and survival. As this process continues, you start connecting events in your life that once seemed unrelated. You recognize how certain experiences shaped your fears, how particular relationships influenced your confidence, and how past disappointments quietly altered your expectations about the future. At first, these realizations can feel overwhelming because they bring honesty into areas you may have avoided examining closely. Yet, this honesty is exactly where healing begins. Emotional wounds that were ignored in busier seasons finally have space to be addressed. Old disappointments that once lingered in the background slowly lose their hold as you begin understanding them from a new perspective. Isolation allows time for reflection, and reflection often leads to release. Instead of carrying unresolved emotions forward into every new chapter of life, you begin processing them in a healthier way. The quiet environment gives your mind room to breathe, and that breathing space gradually strengthens your resilience. Over time, you notice that situations which once triggered anxiety or frustration begin losing their power. You start responding with more clarity and less emotional reaction because the inner work is reshaping how you interpret the world around you. This transformation can feel subtle at first, almost like a slow shift in perspective rather than a dramatic breakthrough. Yet, subtle changes often create the strongest foundations for lasting growth. During this stage, your thinking becomes more deliberate. You question assumptions that once guided your decisions automatically. You examine your goals with greater honesty, asking yourself whether they truly reflect your purpose, or whether they were simply inherited expectations from environments you once occupied. The chosen one frequently discovers that many of the ambitions they once pursued were influenced by external approval rather than internal calling. Isolation removes that external approval long enough for your authentic direction to become visible. And as that direction becomes clearer, something else begins emerging alongside it. Strength. Not the loud, aggressive form of strength that demands attention, but a quieter form, rooted in understanding. You become less dependent on validation from others because the quiet season has forced you to develop confidence from within. Decisions that once required reassurance from multiple voices now become easier because your inner sense of direction has sharpened. This clarity does not appear instantly. It develops gradually through reflection, patience, and honest evaluation of your past experiences. Over time, you start recognizing lessons hidden inside moments that once felt like failure. Situations that previously seemed painful or confusing now reveal themselves as turning points that shaped your character. Even mistakes begin to look different when viewed through the lens of growth. Instead of carrying regret, you begin extracting wisdom. This process transforms your relationship with your past. What once felt like a collection of setbacks becomes a series of training moments that prepared you for greater responsibility. And while this internal development unfolds, new ideas often begin appearing in your mind. Without constant distraction, creativity and insight have space to emerge. You may start imagining possibilities that never crossed your mind during busier seasons of life. Skills you once overlooked begin attracting your attention. Interests that seemed minor before now appear significant because they align with the direction forming inside you. The chosen one often experiences this stage as a quiet awakening of potential. Talents that were buried beneath routine suddenly feel relevant. Perspectives that once felt uncertain become sources of confidence. Even the way you view the future begins changing. Instead of reacting to circumstances as they appear, you start shaping your path intentionally. Scripture shows that this pattern of quiet preparation appears repeatedly before moments of public impact. Even Jesus spent time in the wilderness before beginning his ministry, stepping away from the crowds long enough for spiritual focus to deepen before stepping forward into purpose.
That season of solitude was not wasted time. It was alignment. The same principle applies to your own journey.
While the outside world may interpret your quiet season as inactivity, something significant is taking place beneath the surface. Your character is strengthening. Your understanding is expanding. Your identity is becoming clearer than it has ever been before. And although the transformation may not yet be visible to others, it is quietly shaping the person you are becoming. Isolation has a way of removing the noise that once distracted you from your own potential. It strips life down to its essential questions, forcing you to examine what truly matters and what no longer belongs in your future. The process may feel slow, but slow growth often produces the strongest results. Roots develop in darkness long before branches reach toward the sky. In the same way, the quiet work happening inside you right now may be building the very foundation that will support your greatest breakthroughs later.
The chosen one often walks through this stage, feeling unseen by the world, yet known deeply by God. And while the world waits for visible success, heaven is focused on the transformation happening within you. Because the person you are becoming during this quiet season is the person who will eventually be ready to carry the opportunities that are still on their way. Chosen one. After a long season of quiet reflection and inner transformation, something subtle begins to change. The silence that once felt heavy starts carrying a different energy. The isolation that once seemed endless begins revealing signs that the season is shifting. At first, the change is almost impossible to notice. It does not arrive with a dramatic announcement or a sudden breakthrough moment that instantly transforms everything. Instead, it appears quietly, much like the first light before sunrise. The same way dawn slowly pushes back the darkness without making noise. The lessons you gained during isolation begin influencing your life in ways that gradually become visible. Your perspective has changed, and because your perspective has changed, the way you move through the world begins changing as well. Decisions that once felt confusing now seem obvious. Situations that once created hesitation now feel manageable. The clarity developed during solitude starts guiding your actions naturally. And with that clarity comes a different kind of confidence. Not the loud confidence that tries to prove itself, but the steady confidence that grows from understanding who you are and what direction you are meant to pursue. During the quiet season, you were learning lessons that were invisible to the outside world. You are recognizing patterns in your past, confronting your fears, and rebuilding your priorities from the inside out. Now those internal changes begin shaping your external reality. Opportunities that once passed unnoticed suddenly stand out with surprising clarity. You recognize which doors align with your growth and which ones would lead you back into environments that no longer fit your identity. This is the shift many people misunderstand about personal transformation. They assume that breakthrough arrives as a single event, a moment when everything instantly becomes different. But in reality, breakthrough usually begins as awareness. You see possibilities that were always there, but hidden beneath distraction and uncertainty. Because your thinking has evolved, your decisions evolve as well. Instead of reacting impulsively to every opportunity that appears, you start choosing with intention. You begin asking deeper questions about whether each path aligns with the purpose forming inside you. That intentional thinking becomes the bridge between preparation and progress. The chosen one often realizes that the isolation they once feared was quietly teaching them how to recognize the right opportunities when they finally appear. Before the quiet season, it would have been easy to chase the wrong direction simply because it looked appealing in the moment. But now you see with greater discernment. You recognize the difference between movement and purpose. Movement simply fills time, while purpose builds something lasting. That difference changes everything about how you approach your future. As this shift continues, you also notice that certain relationships no longer influence you the way they once did. During earlier stages of your life, other people's opinions may have carried significant weight in your decisions. Approval, criticism, and expectations from those around you may have shaped how you saw yourself. and what you believed was possible. But isolation quietly reduced that influence. When you spent time alone reflecting on your life, you began building a stronger sense of identity that did not rely on constant validation. Now that identity allows you to move forward with clearer boundaries. You no longer feel pressured to maintain connections that distract you from your growth. Instead, you begin recognizing which relationships support your direction and which ones belong to a chapter that is already ended. This realization does not come from bitterness or resentment. It comes from clarity. Growth naturally changes the environment around you because not every connection evolves at the same pace. As your understanding deepens, you become more selective about the spaces you occupy and the influences you allow into your life. This selectivity is not isolation returning in another form. It is wisdom developed through experience. God often uses quiet seasons to refine a person's judgment so they can navigate future opportunities with greater awareness. Throughout Scripture, this pattern appears again and again in the lives of those who eventually step into positions of influence. David spent years developing resilience, discipline, and faith before the moment arrived when he would lead a nation. Those years were not filled with public recognition. Much of his growth happened in private moments, where he faced challenges that shaped his character long before his leadership became visible to others. By the time opportunity appeared, he was not the same person who had started the journey. The preparation had already changed him. In the same way, the quiet season you experienced was building the foundation necessary for the opportunities now beginning to appear in your life. The shift you feel is not coincidence. It is the natural result of preparation meeting timing. When your internal growth aligns with the moment God opens a door, progress begins unfolding in ways that once seemed impossible. Situations that once felt stagnant suddenly begin moving again. New connections appear. Fresh ideas begin turning into real possibilities. The difference now is that you approach these opportunities with greater awareness than you had before. Instead of rushing forward blindly, you move with intention. You understand that not every door must be opened, and not every path must be followed. Discernment becomes one of the most valuable lessons gained during isolation. Because you spent time examining your identity, you now recognize when an opportunity aligns with your purpose and when it simply offers temporary excitement without long-term meaning. This understanding protects you from repeating patterns that once kept you stuck. The shift from preparation to opportunity is rarely loud, but it is unmistakable once you begin noticing it. Your thinking becomes sharper, your direction becomes clearer. The confusion that once surrounded your future begins fading as your confidence grows stronger with each step forward. And slowly, almost quietly, you begin realizing something remarkable about the journey you have walked so far. The isolation that once felt like stagnation was actually training. The silence that once seemed empty was shaping your perspective. And now, as opportunities begin appearing in front of you, you understand why that preparation was necessary. Because the person you were before the quiet season would not have recognized the doors that are now opening. But the person you have become during isolation is ready to walk through them with clarity, purpose, and faith. Chosen one. Eventually, the moment arrives when you begin seeing your journey with a clarity that was impossible during the earlier stages of isolation. The quiet season that once felt confusing slowly reveals its true purpose. What once looked like delay begins to resemble preparation. What once felt like rejection starts looking more like protection. You realize that if life had continued at the same pace as before, you might never have stepped back long enough to recognize the deeper direction waiting for you. Isolation created the distance necessary for transformation to take root. Without that distance, the noise of your previous environment would have continued shaping your decisions, keeping you tied to routines and expectations that were never meant to define your future. The breakthrough you experience now is not simply an external opportunity appearing at the right moment. It is the alignment between who you have become and the path that now stands in front of you. During the quiet season, you rebuilt parts of your identity that were once shaped by other people's opinions and circumstances.
You learned to recognize your own direction instead of constantly adjusting to the expectations around you. That internal rebuilding created a foundation strong enough to support real growth. When the breakthrough finally arrives, it often feels less dramatic than people imagine. There may not be a single explosive moment where everything instantly changes. Instead, you notice that doors begin opening naturally in areas that once felt blocked. Ideas that formed quietly during your time of reflection begin turning into real possibilities. Opportunities appear that align with your abilities and the perspective you developed during isolation. Because your understanding has matured, you recognize these moments as more than coincidence. You see them as the natural result of preparation meeting timing. The quiet season allowed you to rebuild your direction without interference, and now that direction begins shaping the opportunities unfolding around you. Many chosen ones eventually reach a point where they look back on their isolation and realize something unexpected. The loneliness that once felt painful was also the environment where their strongest growth occurred. Without the distance created by that season, the transformation inside them might never have taken place. Comfort rarely produces the clarity required for meaningful change. Growth usually emerges when life slows down enough to force reflection. God often uses those quieter chapters to develop strength, wisdom, and patience before allowing a person to step into greater responsibility. Scripture reflects this pattern repeatedly. Preparation appears before elevation. Challenges appear before expansion. The quiet seasons that once seemed empty are often the moments where God shapes the character needed for the next stage of life. When the breakthrough finally becomes visible, it does not erase the memory of isolation. Instead, it explains it. You understand why certain relationships faded. You recognize why certain opportunities disappeared earlier in your journey. Those losses were not random. They created space for something better aligned with who you were becoming. The chosen one eventually realizes that their path was never truly paused. It was simply being redirected through a quieter road that most people never notice while they are walking it. What once looked like a waiting room was actually a training ground, and the silence that once felt uncomfortable was the place where your purpose was quietly taking shape. So if life ever feels unusually quiet, and your circle suddenly grows smaller than it used to be, resist the urge to assume that something has gone wrong. Sometimes isolation is not abandonment. Sometimes it is preparation. The world tends to celebrate visible progress, but the most important transformations often happen in the seasons when very little appears to be happening on the surface. If this message resonated with you today, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may be walking through their own quiet season, and subscribe for more content that explores the deeper meaning behind life's unexpected transitions. And if you have ever experienced a season of isolation that later led to growth or clarity, leave a comment and share your story. Your experience may be exactly the encouragement someone else needs to hear today.